Hello, everyone. Thank you to all participants joining this roundtable today, and thank you also to the audience listening to us both on site and online. So my name is Candice Masucci-Templier, and I am a senior consultant in space policy at Euroconsult, and I have the pleasure to be moderating this panel today on a very interesting topic on the global economic disparity between countries in benefiting from outer space, as we see more and more countries, especially emerging ones, getting in the space industry and joining this market. So space is a growing market, bringing several advantages to states and societies, whether in improving their technology, connectivity capabilities, also be more competitive. It also allows to tackle environmental and climate change issues. Space also allows to address food insecurities, to monitor agriculture, fishery, land, forests, or even track illegal activities, just to name a few of the benefits. And such activities would in turn have positive socioeconomic impacts on states and their populations. So overall, the participation in space activities grows and it diversifies over time. And emerging spacefaring nations are increasing their efforts in the space domain to acquire more autonomous capacities to access and operate in space and benefit from a variety of those space activities. Although the space industry landscape is evolving, welcoming new players, for example, Japan, Colombia, Lithuania, Paraguay, Egypt, Philippines, just to name a few, the emerging and non-spacefaring nations do not necessarily benefit as much from space assets, which could undermine the inclusion in the sector and potentially create a global economic disparity in benefiting from outer space. So that would be the topic of our discussion today, and I am pleased to welcome a lot of participants and contributors to this discussion. So on site, I have the pleasure to welcome Matthias Kampas-Abad, who is the CEO of Astralintu, Thomas Uzak as well, who is the Principal Advisor for Digital and Data Technologies in the General for International Partnerships at the European Commission, Carlton Johnson, Chairman of the Board of Governance at the National Space Society, Claire Joly, Head of the Ocean Economy and Space Economy in the Directorate for Space Technology and Innovation at OECD, Sigara Meideva, Radio Spectrum Lead Specialist at Azar Cosmos, and Trent Trench, Member of the Board of Directors at the Kairos Foundation. Among the participants online, we also have Dexter Banjo, who is the CEO and founder at Orbital Exploration Technologies, Ahmad Amoui, CEO and founder at Ignitos Space, Quan Yang, Associate Professor of International Law at Beijing Institute of Technology, and finally, Yan Wen, who is a member of the Board of Directors at the Kairos Foundation. So welcome everyone, and thank you for participating to this panel. So without further ado, let's get started with the first topic of our conversation, where we will be identifying the scope of the issue of the socioeconomic gap between the spacefaring and non-spacefaring countries. So basically, how does the space gap concretely impact the non-spacefaring nations from either an economic, strategic, scientific, or even a security perspective? And maybe what are the risks of a potential socioeconomic gap in the space sector? So I would invite our first contributors to take the floor and to give your views on this. So maybe if you want to start, Mrs. Claire Joly.
Dear all, dear moderator, thank you very much for welcoming me to this roundtable. I would like to thank the organizers for having the OECD contributing to this important session. At the OECD, I had what we call the OECD Space Forum. It's a group of 11 space agencies, namely NASA, the European Space Agency, the French Space Agency, and quite a few others. And we have a very strong partnership, I would say, with many industry players and academia around the world to provide specific evidence on the economics of space activities. This is our niche, this is what we do. And when we look at the situation of developing countries and space programs, obviously there's a huge gap. I have 3 main points here that I would like to quickly share with you. Many of the numbers that I may give are all actually in a paper that we put together as a background paper for the G20 discussions last year. The paper is entitled Space Economy for People, Planet and Prosperity, and that's the theme that was chosen by the Italian presidency during their G20 last year. So my main 3 points here is that first, we do have growing evidence on the space economy contributions to economic growth and innovation everywhere. Not only in OECD countries that include, and you named a few, Candice already, a few points here, but 4 main families, I would say, of benefits in terms of contributions to innovation and entrepreneurship. And we'll have a number of examples today, I think, from a number of developing countries. In terms of monitoring the climate and the environment, bridging the digital divide and providing development assistance. In particular for climate, I think most of us know around this table, and I think it should be known elsewhere from different parts, in other rooms here, is that half of the 54 essential climate variables currently used by the international research community to characterize Earth's climate are actually based on satellite data. This is something that we often forget, and some of these observations are providing really unique time series with strong local implications in terms of sea level rise and disaster management, as we've seen for Pakistan just a few weeks ago, and still today. So these are very concrete, I would say, benefits. My second point is that indeed the gap exists with many non-spacefaring countries, I would say, but this gap is actually decreasing. We need to be realistic. A number of countries have been investing in space R&D for more than 60 years. So we're not talking here about catching up, but actually better accessing beneficial applications from space R&D for sovereignty and development. I have some examples here in terms of almost 90 countries have registered satellites in orbit at some point. That's twice as many as 15 years ago when we started the Space Forum. We had around 40 countries with satellite in orbit. So we doubled that. This shows growing capacities in some segments of the space sector as countries get involved in global value chains. So whenever you get involved, particularly in small satellite programs, because you cannot compare apples and oranges, obviously, you do develop, you gain capacities and become better user of space applications, even if it's a limited mission in scope and time. And that's something that we've seen in quite a number of Latin American countries in particular. Another point is that digitalization of the economies, including in some developing countries, is making more accessible and affordable knowledge and tools using satellite data. This is really a revolution that we've seen, particularly in the past 5 years, with clouds in particular. New capacities built and derived very often from digital tools that are not directly linked to space. So the gap is really decreasing. But that leads me to the final point in terms of the remaining challenges that we have. And we need to make the most of what we have globally, but there are 2 main points here that I think we can all work on. The first one is addressing skills and gender gaps in the workforce. OECD countries themselves are facing the problem. In almost all sectors of the economy, we have issues, scientists, engineers, maybe not staying on for the long run, but particularly for developing countries, and I'm sure we may hear some testimonies here around the table, it's very difficult when you're talented to actually stay in your country sometimes, to actually make the most of everything that you've learned, particularly in the space sector. This is not new, but we really need to find ways to resolve this, and this may come through different means. We can come back to that. And a final point really in terms of the challenges is still the limitations to accessing and using satellite data. We have some very good success stories, the Charter on Major Disasters that allows countries to team up to provide the best of in terms of data, but also information products in times of crisis, but it is often one-off. What we found, looking specifically at what we call the Official Development Assistance, ODA. That's a large database that we have within the OECD, where we track how official development aid goes. Looking at space-related ODA, we found that over the past 18 years, some $650 million were actually devoted to space ODA by G20 countries. And they were benefiting economies in Far East Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. It means there are already things happening. Space-related ODA projects support a range of different objectives, such as monitoring the environment, natural resources, improving food safety, supporting government services, or developing economic infrastructures. Very often, these are GIS projects that are really supporting local communities on the ground. So, again, millions have been devoted already. But are we going far enough? I don't think so. So more can still be done, I believe. So there are some good practices that exist, and I'm sure we'll share a few today, in sharing satellite data in particular, and most importantly, the information products that local users need. This is something we are also exploring at the OECD, and we would love to share notes with all of you as we really build up more evidence on this. So I'll stop here, and I really look forward to the next speakers. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Claire. I will now give the floor to Thomas Suzak.
Thank you very much. It's an enormous honor to participate in this roundtable today among so prominent, distinguished guests. And thank you for the invitation, and I'm looking very much forward for this fruitful discussion. And I'm extremely happy as well to have this opportunity to speak after Claire and the OECD, who is bringing a lot of evidence as well to different analysis about the inclusion in space, and as well the potential and the results as well of programs and initiatives that are globally taken on board. And I would like just directly rely on what has just been said, because for me there are three main messages for today. First, there is a trend, and I think Claire already has presented. Second is a continuous change as well of the economic, socio-economic environment, and as well of the possibilities that can bring towards us. And third, there is already a response taking place, which I would like to share with you as well. First, on the trend, I think Claire already has presented some of the examples. When we observe as well from the European Commission perspective, where for the last years developing constellations, Galileo, Copernicus, now space secured connectivity, space traffic management, EGNOS, just to presenting the most important ones, we see at the example of, for instance, Africa, the emergence of many space agencies there. From 2000, especially after 2010, we have already today 19 countries establishing space agencies. And if we just observe between 2019 and 2020, the countries have doubled their budgets for space. So that shows already that, yes, just let's not enter in the trap. The gap is decreasing, of course, but we have as well to see that the public spending in space counts for 80% for G20 countries and only 20% for the others. And this is OECD figure, if I remember correctly. So on the other hand, yes, we have the closure of the gap. On the second hand, yes, I think Claire already has as well mentioned it, where the access to some activities is today better. And this is why I have to say that we have a big change of mindsets when it comes to space. First is the economics, because digital is, of course, we observe, is an important part, but then we have as well artificial intelligence, but some industrial processes, 3D printing, that will allow us to build nano pocket satellites in our garage, wherever it is. It can be Poland, it can be Finland, it can be Rwanda, because the process through digital connectivity can go directly to this 3D printer in Rwanda, and then the capacity for closing this gap is becoming much bigger. So miniaturization as well. So different industrial processes that are entering together can offer solutions as well for the future. And this is exactly where we have today this new perspective that appears, because we are talking for many years about upstream economics. Today we are as well speaking about downstream sectors, and this is where this biggest potential when it comes to taking the data, use of data, exploitation of data, merging of data between different capacity is coming as an important value that can quickly bring non-spacefaring countries to the same table and give the opportunity to develop skills to close the gender gap and all the societal problems, environmental, societal, climate problems that nowadays we have to face. And three, we have the response. And especially I'm very proud as well to come as a representative of DG INTPA, European Commission. It's for more than 1 year today that we are developing the concept of global gateway, a big strategy, a connectivity strategy, where the main aim is to connect the world with all the means that we have. And if we look at Africa, the Earth observation, space Earth observation data flagship that we develop, we have a project that today will gather 100 million euros, but especially to bring private sector in, because the key lies with the private sector to be brought in. And on one hand, to help the new African Space Agency that was created in 2018, to think on one side about the downstream, but as well about the upstream, to build maybe satellites in Africa, how to create as well ecosystems, and of course, finally, as well, how to develop all those sectors that already the European Commission has been very active for many, many years, from 2008, about the global monitoring of environment security, on the forest management, so on the program Climate as well, that was very active, how to make sure that everything that is important as well for African countries, and especially to take into account what is genuinely important for them, because what space in the terms of inclusivity offers is, I think, it's a fair cooperation. When it takes to programs of Copernicus, when we exchange data, it's on fair basis. Data coming from the countries, data gathered by Copernicus programs, and both the EU and the countries that are involved in the projects are beneficial in this process. And this is, I think, the good part of the sport, that this is a fair inclusion and that everybody can bring, according as well to the ways and the experience, the local experience and the local ownership, because that's what counts as well for our policies. Second part, if you look at digital alliance with Latin America in view of the summit next year, important as well cooperation is taking place around the Bella cable, around the centers of excellence that we have in Panama, in Chile, and various programs that will be developed them together with academia and together with the private sector. Finally, we managed to open as well a center of excellence in Philippines, and as well other projects ongoing for this part of the region. Having said that, once again, Global Gateway is a response, but Global Gateway will be possible if all the stakeholders, as well EU member states, in a so-called Team Europe spirit, will work together, and that the investments and the money that will be foreseen for investments will bring investors on board, because then we'll have an important effect of this initiative. But once again, thank you for this opportunity, and I'm very glad and looking forward to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. Can someone just among the organizer confirm me if Ahmad is online or no? He is, right? Okay, so Ahmad, I can give you the floor.
Sorry, can you give me 2 more minutes? I'm just relocating because I'm at COP27. So if the next person can go ahead, and I'm just sitting down and I'll be with you.
Okay, so I will give the floor to Kwan Yong.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Kwan Yang. I'm from Beijing Institute of Technology, China. Thanks for inviting me, and it's my honor to participate in the forum from Beijing. So as to the issue regarding the socio-economic gap between space-free and non-space-free countries, I think I would like to make 3 points first. The first point is that, as mentioned by the previous speakers and many scholars, international cooperation is deemed as an important way to cope with the gap. So we need to strengthen the cooperation among states or international organizations in outer space. However, the question is that what is true or genuine or effective international cooperation in space area? For instance, is carrying your own payload on other states' rocket by paying expensive fees international cooperation? Is launching your own satellites through the launching service of other states' international cooperation? Probably not, in my opinion. I think these are more like transactions or business rather than international, genuine or effective international cooperation. So what shall be real and effective international cooperation in the space domain is a very important issue. The second point I would like to say that as I'm a lawyer and a legal scholar, I always look at the relevant international law and particularly space law when discussing relevant issues. In this regard, there are obvious deficiencies in the current international space law regime, which may have a negative impact or even aggravate the gap between spacefaring and non-spacefaring countries. For instance, as to the legal regulation of space resources exploitation and the legal regulation of large constellation of small satellites or other newly emerged commercial space activities, the current international space law system is not sufficient and effective to cope with the new challenges. Some important principles, such as the principle of the common heritage of mankind in outer space, has not been generally accepted, and that most spacefaring countries have not acceded to the Moon Agreement. This is also known as the fragmentation of international law or international space law. While there are no unified international legal regimes regarding these important space issues, the gap may continue to expand. So then the third point is that while we often see that the gap regarding space technologies between spacefaring and non-spacefaring countries is quite big, we may ignore that in addition to the lack of advanced space technology or launching capacities, non-spacefaring countries also lack the so-called soft power in the space domain. For instance, the inadequacy of domestic legal and policy instrument, the lack of national space law, the lack of space development strategies and plans, the incapacity to participate in international space lawmaking. This may also lead to a greater gap between spacefaring and non-spacefaring countries. So these are the 3 points I would like to raise first. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I would like now to open the floor for discussion just for this first part, and every participant can jump in. What do you think are the national capacities that are most likely to be affected by a lack of access to outer space in the mid or long term?
So, if I may, and I'm going to, because of time, I'm going to try to hit this with a couple of points as well, if that's okay. Thank you. First, I do want to also thank the Paris Peace Forum for the opportunity to be here today and for this distinguished group. We have an opportunity to do something very substantive. And I'll preface my comments here in line with the question of my original comments by starting and saying, as a U.S. person, as an American, but also as a former military person, I get the national priorities. I get the nationalization aspects of going into space. But as a person of color, and also a human in team humanity, I've also known what it's like to be the only person in the room who looks like me and not get a seat at the table. And it's not fun. So as I look at that and I ask myself, why is it important for us to go forth? You know, we can all agree or disagree on the points we're going to talk about today, but at some point we can all agree that we're going to lose the Earth. The sun's going to go out. And when that happens, we're not just going to lose the Earth. We're going to lose Molière. We're going to lose the Louvre. We're going to lose the Magna Carta, the American Constitution, the religious text, all the things that make us who we are. So we have a responsibility to go forth, but we have to do it as team humanity. Going forth means that we have to have inclusion to bring not only the best of capabilities forward, but to understand what those capabilities are. So when we look at this issue of inclusion between spacefaring nations and non-spacefaring nations or emerging spacefaring nations, I offer the following context. When a non-spacefaring nation, and let's just say they're a farming community, you know, you go to them and say, hey, what's your proposition going to space? They'll probably go, I have no idea. So the spacefaring nations have the opportunity to communicate to them. These are things that from the Maslow's hierarchy of needs that you have in your nation that may be able to help us out here. Case in point, we all know that farming technology in spacefaring nations uses GPS. We can bring that forth and educate them in that regard. The second thing is that country, that non-spacefaring nation, emerging spacefaring nation state, has to understand the economic value proposition that they bring to the table. We can help them with that by doing the economic analysis with them and then bringing forth, these are the capabilities that you can use to not only get a seat at the table, but be a valued contributor to the overall conversation. And then the next step is, of course, if you communicate this and you educate people on this, you gotta follow through. And so between the spacefaring nations and the other teams we're trying to bring in, looking at the legal issues that were brought up, looking at the economic proposition, all of these things, we can develop a framework that helps them grow, get a seat at the table, and then we go forth together as Team Humanity into space. We have to look at this from the economics as well to enable this. That's going to be, I believe, one of the first steps. And then moving forward, and this is frankly where I put back on the national versus personal hat, we can have national conversations all day long. It's going to happen, that's politics. At some point, we have to put that aside and ask the question, what's best for Team Humanity? And then leverage those so we can actually settle out into intersolar and beyond. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Carlton. So I think that we already started to tackle some of the possible solutions that would overcome such disparities. And so how do you think can space be used also as a mechanism to maybe address the socioeconomic gap between countries? So here I would invite other contributors. We have Matthias Camposabad. Do you want to take the floor?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here in this round table. So I was in the panel just before this, so you maybe heard my thoughts on sustainability. So I'll keep it short here. I'll just want to mention that I represent the IAF in the Administrative Committee for Emerging Countries. I'm the vice chair there, and I'm also the chair of the Latin American and Caribbean subcommittee. So I'm happy to share our views, our experience, not only on my company, Astralintu, but on our partners from Costa Rica, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, and others in Africa. And yeah, the socioeconomic aspect that you were asking, it's exactly as our speaker was saying. Is I think that we do understand the benefits, and it's not, we're not waiting for some like developed country or developed emerging space actor to come to our countries and say like, here, this is good for you, or we understand it. And it's not that we don't think of it as a gap. When the gap is being called, it seems like there's the developed world and emerging world. It's more like the developed world is like a line, and the emerging world is also like a line. But there's some points that intersect, and that's where we should collaborate. Okay, it's not okay. Let's help them. They're gonna be helpful to us in 5 years. We can collaborate in 5 years. No, let's talk to them. We can collaborate today. We can work together now. And of course, space brings an interesting perspective because borders disappear. We're all in a team humanity. We're outside, and we would benefit from having international appearance. So, for example, with the constellations, we need to. I heard over and over from European constellations, oh, when we go through Latin America, we have nowhere to download. Okay, we can tackle that now. We don't have to wait. And there's many, many examples like that from as I was saying, Costa Rica and Mexico. So happy to bring that conversation, those points of view to this table. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Matthias. Yes, indeed. I think that collaboration can take different forms, and one of them can also to help enable those emerging countries to be autonomous. So not necessarily give the solutions and like adopt it right away, but also to give the tools that would enable them to develop and be autonomous, etc. And lastly, I will give the floor to Ahmad, if you are ready.
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you. So sorry, I'm at COP27 trying to see how to save life on Earth. So thank you everyone for the opportunity. And first thing I want to say is I love what I'm seeing here. I see people from different countries all coming together. And this is the best thing about space. Space is all about collaboration, not competition. And we need to hold that mantle properly, all of us. So for me, I wanted to talk about a very useful thing that personally I'm doing through my company, which is bridging the gap between the high tech and the people who actually need it. In a lot of countries, and I'm talking coming from Zambia and from Lebanon. So in a lot of countries, people don't know that now the technology is very accessible to people. And on first hand, you don't need your own satellite to actually get access to satellite data and start analyzing and do research. And on the other hand, they don't know that even if you want your own satellite, it's not a very far-fetched dream. It doesn't cost hundreds of millions of dollars. You can even start with a CubeSat and start doing research on the ground. I'm talking, as I said, from experience. When I approached some government officials in Zambia, and most of them said, oh, what do we need $100 million project for? There's no use cases. And this is what I'm trying to bridge between that. So I'm creating an AI that takes satellite technology, satellite data from various different satellites from different countries and combines it together to do research and give actionable insights on the ground. Because the people on the ground, the farmers, the people, the civil engineers and so on, when they see the use cases, when they see how the future can be better because of satellite technology, they will push the governments to start collaborating together and working together, which will change the whole way of us looking at space and collaboration in space. And the last thing I wanted to mention is something I didn't really know about until 2 months ago when I visited Virgin Orbit. And they have the project that is called Launcher One, which was absolutely beautiful because it's always been a dream to launch from your country, but it's always been restricted to where you can launch satellites from or even people from. So I believe what Virgin Orbit is doing, using the airplane to launch rockets to space, is gonna change completely the way history is looking like, because now we can actually launch from any country in the world. It doesn't have to be only the 11 countries that we're used to. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmad. Among the people around the table or even online, would you like to add anything to the conversation?
I would love to add.
Yes, sure.
Go ahead.
It's up to you.
Appreciate the opportunity. I'm Azim Maherali, a knowledge diplomacy practitioner. And I would challenge our family here to be more aggressive in inclusion, in thinking more about space as a platform for who really speaks for humanity and who really speaks for the planet. And to think in our dialogue and in our consideration and in our research more from a trustee perspective, as opposed to more from a commercialization and nationhood perspective, right? As my trusted partner here said, you know, who speaks for Team Humanity? And really, I think the Space Forum can be a champion for humanity, excuse me about that, to really become a role model in approaching problems and solutions for the planet, right? And so as we talk about sustainability or inclusion or many things that we have considered in SDG goals and the things that the Paris Peace Conference is looking at, the model that we have is very Earth-focused, and maybe we'll start looking at looking from the perspective of there's really one planet, right? The borders that exist are artificial borders, and the perspectives that need to shape our solutions should be more from a human-centric perspective as opposed to nationhood and other perspectives that are more or not more, but less rigorous in looking at it from that paradigm. So I would encourage you to kind of consider looking at the whole solution and dialogue from a trustee perspective so that we can have more permanent solutions and better approaches. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trent, you wanted to add something?
Hi, everyone. Trent Tresh here from the Kalis Foundation. Thank you all for this opportunity and the comments and thought processes. It's great to hear the progress that has been made so far in the space industry. I would like to bring my own perspective, which is that more so of human space exploration and analog research. You know, what I hear a lot of here today is around low Earth orbit, geo, and so on for satellite operations opportunities, which makes a lot of sense, right? As we continue into the future, we see 50 to 70% or more of constellations or other economic opportunities growing around those constellations, internet access, and so on, Earth observation, climate science research. But when we do think about Earth and when we think about sustainability, and when we think about investment opportunities, I think that monetarily, space is historically expensive and difficult. But there are opportunities at the lower levels to include people from across the world, across nations, and however we want to look at that, people from Earth, in human exploration, which can result in educational and workforce opportunities and development, as well as Earth-based spin-offs. As we've all heard previously, within our lives, the technologies that come out of space exploration, what's being researched and developed on the ISS, and those technologies and how they're applicable directly to life on Earth. So maybe you are familiar with analogs, but it's definitely a different avenue here at the Paris Peace Forum. An analog is really a field research opportunity for people to come together, usually within academic educational institutions, to do research. I like to say it's practice for space. You know, the astronauts that we have on the ISS, they train for at least 10 hours underwater at the Neutral Buoyancy Facility, JSC, or other locations before they do a spacewalk on orbit. And we see a lot of these analogs that are popping up around the world. One specific example that I would like to give to you all is that in Jordan, through the Moon Village, if you all have heard of this organization before, they have something called Participation of Emerging Space Countries Program. And again, countries like Jordan are using that platform. They've created a 20-year roadmap. They're actually focusing on things like water resource management, renewable energy, in situ resource utilization, robotics, dust mitigation, agriculture, technology development, smart city infrastructure, and women's health. So from a lower level, they're bringing in academics and people that want to be involved, becoming connected with educational opportunities, free resources like MIT OpenCourseWare, Coursera, and so on that provide free opportunities to learn about space and get people excited about space, and then getting them actually in the field and hands-on. So I think there's another potential here to provide those types of opportunities and to have that conversation. My last point really quickly is just that I also feel that we do need to define what success looks like. Who wants to get involved in space? Is it CubeSats? Is it human spaceflight? What does that success look like? And how do we communicate that, educate, and follow through on those potentials? So thank you.
Thank you, Trent. Online, would you like to take the floor?
Can I speak? Hello?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Dexter Banjo from the Philippines. So thank you very much for this opportunity to represent my country and also maybe the rest of the developing countries in Southeast Asian region. I'm here today to speak briefly on the perspective of a developing country with a culture of bureaucracy and delays and possibly corruption. So on that aspect, because we are already talking on the higher scope, the technological viewpoint, and some numbers. So here in the Philippines, what I'm doing together with a couple of team members, we are actually the first commercial spaceflight company in the Philippines. Well, less funded, as you can see, as you can observe. But the amount of severity of our workload is to an extent that is out of this world, pun intended. But since 2019, we need to work with different organizations, and we need to ensure, like what our colleagues here mentioned, that the industry, the academe, and the government would work together in order to facilitate the innovation needed to make sure that this new industry will come into fruition, especially in the Philippines. So my company, in my perspective, is currently working with the government. We recently submitted a policy to the Senate of the Philippines to make sure that the next generation of players in our industry will have the infrastructure, the facilities required to develop their technologies, and to make sure that everything will be possible. And at the same time, outside the Philippines, we are working with different countries, different participants from different countries. For example, we signed an agreement with Enyo Space from Singapore, and also we are scheduled to talk to a UAE representative next week. So why am I telling you this? Because on the perspective of a developing country with this kind of condition, unknown condition to some of you, we need to work on everything from scratch, because we cannot rely everything to the government. We don't have the roadmap specific for our country, specific for our condition. So we can always talk about the higher level, but at the end of the day, the purpose of this is to understand the benefit and the role that the founders or forefathers of this industry could help to countries like us. So here in our country, just to end this talk of mine, we have lower cost of production and lower cost of labor as well. So with these regards, I think to all the players here, I would like to encourage you to try to look to developing countries who are already here playing in this particular industry. Try to look into the things that they do and try to invest, because with lower cost of production and lower cost of labor, we can see the macro level that the cost of the development for the nearest future will be leaning towards the developing countries. I'm not saying that we should exploit the low cost of labor, but that's the scenario currently in the Philippines that I think is very ideal for investment because we are in the developing country. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you very much.
Thank you to you. Carlton.
Yeah, I did have additional comment, but I do want to make sure that my esteemed colleague, Sitara, if you haven't had a chance to say anything, so if there's anything you want to add before I go.
Thank you. Actually, I do not have any speak for this session, but just on behalf of Azer Cosmos Space Agency, as I informed most of my colleagues, I am here just an observer to observe what's going on with the big stakeholders, between the stakeholders, and we are also trying to do something for our space. And for example, for me, I'm trying to help for development countries, such as creating the filings. Actually, I'm spectrum guy, not too much related with the debris and etc. So therefore, I'm trying to help to other countries to find the beneficial orbit for their capturing for their countries. And furthermore, I am helping to creating the filings and to submit their filings to ITU, and I'm trying to follow the ITU rules for helping to the development countries. And I would like to thank to everyone to sharing their experience with us, and I hope next time on behalf of Azer Cosmos Space Agency, we can also assist you in somehow. Thank you.
Thanks. And so to just add additional comment here on that, once again, just my DNA is I just like us to lead. You know, it's lead, follow, get out of the way. There's a American game kids play. It's called Whack-A-Mole. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's kids love it. I can't stand it because there's no end state. So what I'd like us to do, and I'll offer this as a thought for the team. Let's lead, and I'll make a recommendation in this regard. We have the opportunity here and I will recommend we create a working group that's going to do a couple things. Number one, analyze this issue, in particular with the understanding and desire to create a framework that enables inclusion. It's going to have to address the things that everybody's been talking about, legal. I like the idea of the analogs. You were very astute in pointing out the fact that emerging nations don't need other people to come help them. There's maybe a halfway point where help is available if needed, and the right type of help to define what success looks like is probably the better conversation. So they would also identify, in addition to that framework, conduct the initial and economic analysis we were talking about to see what success looks like, what do nations need, and on both sides of defense, emerging and spacefaring. Identify the low-hanging fruit that is we can use today to help accelerate those nations, i.e. the analogs. I like that idea again. And then the third part is, which is really the hard part, look at identifying the strategic objectives we would need to achieve in order to enable that inclusion we're talking about. I would make that recommendation for this team. And with everything you've said today, I think we have the potential to do some real good here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We don't have much time left.
May I add? Just to add, I like the actionable item that was proposed. I suggest including formalizing liaisons within this working group that was suggested, and organizations like the IAF with committees that work on the similar lines, and also with the SGAC, which also has young people, students and young professionals that are also working on that line. So instead of working from different organizations in parallel, trying to find common ground where all three can help in the diversity and integration of emerging countries in the space industry.
Thank you, Matthias. Allow me to ask maybe a last question before wrapping up this panel. Overall, among with all the potential solutions or obstacles that we identified today, what do you think, what measures maybe can be put in place or actions should be undertaken? What are the key measures or action that should be undertaken to overcome, decrease even more the gap between the spacefaring nations and non-spacefaring nations? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Tanja Massonswaan from the University of Leiden. There is one element that I haven't heard, and we've spoken about launch capabilities, satellite capabilities, analog. I think it's also very important to include education or capacity building in the field of governance and legal aspects. I was in Indonesia a few weeks ago and I gave a guest lecture at the university, and I asked the students, what are the topics that you want to learn about, that you want to know more about? And they came with very traditional topics like the definition and delimitation of outer space or the legal status of the geostationary satellite orbit, topics that have been on the agenda of UN COPOS for 40, 50 years nearly, and which are not close to finding a solution. But there are other topics that are being made now, that where rules and governance systems are being made now, space traffic management, space resource utilizations, all these topics, but they don't have access to the literature, they don't have access to the knowledge. So I think also really the capacity building in that field, in educating the young people in space emerging or developing countries should also be part of this activity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any comments, additional remarks from anyone, even online? Okay, great. Well, Matthias, go ahead.
I just want to say an idea I like a lot from the IF is the 3G. So just to close that, the generation, geography, and gender is the gap, and diversity is helpful to include all three.
Thank you. So we're running out of time, so it is now time for me to conclude this conversation. First of all, I would like to thank you all for your participation today, for being here, and for being also so interested into this topic. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about the fact that the cap was indeed decreasing, which is good, but we still need to focus on providing the non-spacefaring and emerging countries better access to the space market and the space industry and even R&D. We also saw that some obstacles are remaining, for example, the lack of skills, having difficulty keeping the workforce in place as well. We heard also good ideas, notably that it's important to establish a dialogue, taking into consideration a human-centric perspective, providing the tools also to emerging countries to develop their own capabilities, to collaborate extensively with the private industry as well, not only rely on the public funds, and create awareness to bring political actions. Carlton also raised the importance of communicating and educating about the benefits of space, providing some concrete tools that would enable countries to develop economic value proposition, build the framework, identifying what nations need and what are the strategic objectives also to pursue, and in order to enable the inclusion of our countries to establish a roadmap as well. We also noted the importance of encouraging technology transfers between spacefaring, emerging, and non-space nations. Capacity building is also important in educating people, providing trainings, etc. And the development of space services and programs and research initiatives in general is a critical agenda for socioeconomic development. So overall, the space industry landscape has transitioned towards commercialization and the rise of the private sector with space startups, public-private partnerships, and additionally, the reduced launch costs have opened new opportunities for smaller entities and developing nations to benefit from space technologies and data. So space is a crucial driver for socioeconomic growth. As we saw, the space-based services and application can indeed contribute to socioeconomic purposes, benefiting a variety of industries like agriculture, communication, even disaster preparedness, health, on top of creating jobs and fostering innovation. Ultimately, I would just conclude by saying that emerging and non-spacefaring nations should be supported by international organizations and governments of established spacefaring nations to help them bridge the economic and social inequalities by providing the proper autonomy that they need. So thank you all for your contributions, and I wish you a good end of day. Thank you.
Thank you.